Sup you beautiful people, hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Naruto Abandoned Konoha after the Sasuke Retrieval Arc. What if Naruto, the hero we know, left Konoha after his devastating failure to retrieve Sasuke? Imagine the hidden leaf without its brightest beacon, forcing new heroes and villains to rise. This isn't just a fan theory. It's a deep dive into an alternate reality where Naruto's choices reshape the entire ninja world. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So now let's start this video. The fire crackled between them as Kasame began to speak, his voice carrying the kind of quiet conviction that came from absolute certainty in one's cause. "Tell me, Naruto," he said, using the familiar name with casual presumption, "what do you think causes wars?" It wasn't the question Naruto had expected from an S-class criminal, but he found himself considering it seriously. Months of operating outside village structures had given him perspectives on conflict that his academy education had never covered. "Competition for resources," he said finally, "territorial disputes, ideological differences. Fear all symptoms," Kasame said with a slight shake of his head. "The disease is deeper than that. Wars exist because the current system of hidden villages and competing nations is fundamentally unsustainable. Every village hoards power while preaching cooperation. Every leader speaks of peace while preparing for conflict. Every generation fights the same battles their parents fought, learning nothing and changing nothing." He speaks truth, Kit. How many wars has your village fought in service of peace? How many conflicts have been resolved through superior force disguised as noble purpose? "And Akatsuki's solution?" Naruto asked. "Unity through understanding," Kasame replied. "Not the false unity of political alliances that shift with the wind, but true unity born from shared experience of loss and suffering. People who have never felt real pain can never truly understand the cost of conflict. People who have never faced genuine powerlessness can never appreciate the value of lasting peace." The philosophy was seductive in its simplicity and disturbingly logical in its implications. Naruto had certainly learned more about himself and the world through suffering than through all his years of comfortable village life. "You're talking about making everyone suffer," he said, though without the moral outrage such a statement would have carried months ago. "We're talking about giving everyone the opportunity to grow beyond the limitations that perpetual comfort and security impose." Kasame leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "Look at yourself, Naruto. Has your greatest growth come from your successes or your failures, from acceptance or rejection, from comfort or adversity?" The answer was obvious and disturbing in its implications. Every significant advance in his capabilities, every meaningful insight into his own nature, every moment of genuine personal growth had emerged from struggle, isolation, and the kind of pain that forced evolution beyond previous limitations. "Wisdom born from necessity, Kit. Your village tried to keep you comfortable and controlled, limiting your growth to serve their purposes. Only when you embraced adversity did you discover what you truly were capable of becoming." "So Akatsuki creates adversity to force growth?" Naruto asked. "Akatsuki removes the artificial supports that prevent natural growth," Kasame corrected. "We don't create suffering, we reveal the suffering that already exists beneath comfortable illusions. We don't impose pain, we remove the barriers that prevent people from confronting pain that's already present in their lives." It was a subtle distinction, but an important one. The difference between actively torturing people and simply allowing them to experience consequences they'd been protected from by systems designed to maintain the status quo. "And afterward, those who survive become stronger. Those who adapt become more capable. Those who learn become wiser. And eventually, enough people understand the true cost of conflict that they choose cooperation over competition, unity over division." "What about those who don't survive the process?" Kasame's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, not coldness exactly, but the kind of practical acceptance that came from making hard choices in service of larger goals. "Evolution requires selection pressure. Not everyone is meant to survive every transition. The alternative is stagnation, generation after generation repeating the same mistakes, fighting the same wars, learning nothing from their suffering because they're never forced to truly confront it." Harsh truth, Kit, but truth nonetheless. How many have died in the endless cycle of village conflicts? How many will continue to die while leaders play politics and pretend that incremental changes will somehow produce fundamental transformation? Naruto stared into the fire, watching flames dance in patterns that seemed to mirror his conflicted thoughts. Everything Kasame said resonated with experiences he'd lived through, observations he'd made during his time operating outside village protection. The system was broken. The current approach to peace was demonstrably ineffective. And the alternative being offered, while harsh, seemed to address root causes rather than merely treating symptoms. "What would my role be?" he asked. "That depends on what you're capable of and what you're willing to do," Kasame replied. "Your power makes you valuable for direct action when necessary. Your experience with both village loyalty and village betrayal makes you useful for understanding how others might be motivated to join our cause. Your unique relationship with the Nine Tails makes you irreplaceable for certain specialized operations." "What kind of operations?" "The kind that require someone who can operate beyond normal human limitations. The kind that need tactical flexibility unconstrained by moral qualms about collateral damage. The kind where success depends on power applied with precision and intelligence rather than brute force guided by sentiment." It was a flattering assessment, and one that matched Naruto's growing understanding of his own capabilities. He'd become something beyond standard ninja classifications, something that traditional tactics couldn't easily counter or conventional morality could adequately constrain. He sees what you've become, Kit, not a failed village ninja, but an evolved being capable of things others can barely imagine. This is recognition of your true worth, not the conditional acceptance your village offered. "And if I choose not to join, then you continue your current path as an independent operator, and we remain cordial professionals who occasionally cross paths in our respective pursuits." Kasame's tone remained carefully neutral. "Akatsuki doesn't recruit through coercion. Forced loyalty is ultimately counterproductive to our goals. We want partners, not prisoners." The distinction was important, and it highlighted one of the fundamental differences between this offer and his previous experience with institutional affiliation. Konoha had demanded his loyalty while providing minimal support. Akatsuki was offering partnership while explicitly acknowledging his right to refuse. "I need time to think about it," Naruto said. "Of course. Decisions this significant shouldn't be made hastily." Kasame stood, brushing dirt from his cloak. "Take whatever time you need. When you're ready to discuss specifics, leave word at any of the underground taverns in this region. We'll find you, that's it. No pressure to decide immediately. No threats about what happens if I refuse." "What would be the point?" Kasame asked with genuine curiosity. "You're powerful enough that threats would be counterproductive, intelligent enough that manipulation would be insulting, and independent enough that coercion would be futile. We want you to join because you see value in our goals and methods, not because you feel you have no choice." As the Akatsuki member prepared to leave, Naruto found himself asking a question that had been nagging at him throughout their conversation. "Why now? Why approach me specifically at this point?" "Because now you're ready to hear what we have to offer without immediately rejecting it based on village indoctrination or moral preconceptions." Kasame paused at the edge of the firelight. "The boy who left Konoha months ago wouldn't have understood our purpose or appreciated our methods. The person you've become through your own choices and experiences can evaluate our offer objectively. And what makes you think I'll accept? Because you've already started implementing our philosophy without realizing it. Your recent activities demonstrate exactly the kind of practical problem-solving we value. You identify threats, assess them realistically, and eliminate them permanently when necessary. You don't waste time on moral complexities when simple solutions are available." The assessment was accurate in ways that Naruto found both flattering and disturbing. He had been operating according to principles that aligned closely with what Kasame described as Akatsuki's approach. "One last question," Naruto said as Kasame began to fade back into the shadows. "What makes you think your methods will actually work? That causing suffering will lead to understanding rather than just more conflict." Kasame's shark-like grin was barely visible in the darkness. "Because suffering is the only teacher that everyone listens to, and understanding is the only foundation that peace can actually be built on. Everything else is just wishful thinking disguised as policy." Then he was gone, leaving Naruto alone with the dying fire and thoughts that felt more complex and contradictory than anything he'd experienced since leaving Konoha. Impressive presentation, Kit. He offered respect, opportunity, and purpose without demanding immediate commitment or threatening consequences for refusal. Very different from your village's approach to securing loyalty. "What do you think?" Naruto asked. "About Akatsuki's goals, their methods, their offer. I think they understand power in ways your village never did. I think their analysis of the current system's failures is accurate." And I think their proposed solutions, while harsh, address root causes rather than symptoms. But nothing, Kit. For the first time since we've been partners, someone has offered you opportunities commensurate with your actual capabilities rather than trying to limit you to politically acceptable roles. The question isn't whether their offer has merit, it's whether you're prepared to embrace what you've already become. Naruto fed more wood to his fire and settled back to consider Kasame's words against everything he'd learned during his months of independence. The Akatsuki members' arguments were logical, his assessment of systemic problems was accurate, and his proposed solutions were at least theoretically workable. More importantly, the role he'd described for Naruto was exactly what someone with his evolved capabilities should be doing, applying unique power in service of meaningful goals rather than wasting it on incremental missions that changed nothing fundamental about the world's problems. The moral implications were complex, but then again, conventional morality hadn't proven particularly effective at preventing the endless cycle of conflict that defined the ninja world. Perhaps it was time to consider approaches that prioritized results over ideological purity. As he prepared for sleep, Naruto found himself thinking not about the philosophical complexities of Akatsuki's offer, but about the practical advantages of joining an organization that would value his strength rather than fearing it, appreciate his evolution rather than trying to reverse it, and provide purposes worthy of the power he'd developed. It was tempting, more than tempting, it was logical. Sleep well, Kit. Tomorrow brings new opportunities to observe how the world treats those who operate according to conventional moral constraints versus those who prioritize practical effectiveness. The comparison may be educational. 50 miles to the south, Kakashi's tracking team was making better time than expected, following a trail that seemed almost deliberately obvious in places. He's not trying very hard to avoid detection, Shikamaru observed, studying marks in the dirt that clearly indicated Naruto's passage. Either he doesn't know we're following him, or he doesn't care. Or he wants us to find him, Kakashi said quietly, though he wasn't sure which possibility concerned him more. They'd been pushing hard for 2 days, following intelligence reports and witness accounts that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of Naruto's transformation. The boy they were tracking bore little resemblance to the enthusiastic young ninja who'd left Konoha months ago. This version was efficient, ruthless, and apparently completely comfortable with lethal solutions to problems that might have other remedies. The psychological profile emerging from witness accounts suggested someone who'd not only abandoned his village's moral constraints, but actively rejected them as impediments to effective action. "Sir," one of the Anbu operatives called from ahead. "Fresh campsite, maybe 6 hours old, signs of a visitor." Kakashi examined the site carefully, noting details that told a story he didn't want to interpret correctly. 2 sets of tracks, one belonging to Naruto and the other to someone considerably larger with distinctive boot patterns. A conversation that had lasted several hours based on the arrangement of disturbed ground around the fire pit. Most concerning, no signs of struggle, no evidence of conflict, no indication that the meeting had been anything other than cordial. "Akatsuki?" Shikamaru asked quietly. Probably, Kakashi studied the larger set of tracks, comparing them to intelligence files he'd memorized years ago. Boot pattern matches known associates, timing fits surveillance reports, and the conversation length suggests recruitment rather than confrontation. The implications were staggering. If Akatsuki had made contact with Naruto, if they were actively recruiting rather than simply monitoring, then the window for successful retrieval was closing rapidly. "How much time do we have?" Shikamaru asked. "Maybe none," Kakashi replied grimly. "If he accepts their offer, bringing him home becomes infinitely more complicated. If he joins willingly with full knowledge of what they represent." He didn't finish the thought, but everyone present understood the implications. A willing Akatsuki recruit with Nine-Tails power would represent an existential threat to every major village in the ninja world. "Double pace," Kakashi ordered. "Whatever it takes, we need to reach him before he makes a decision we can't help him undo." As the team resumed their desperate pursuit, none of them spoke about the possibility that they might already be too late, that the boy they were trying to save might have already chosen a path that would require them to destroy him rather than retrieve him. But the thought hung over them like a funeral shroud as they raced toward a confrontation that would determine not just Naruto's fate, but the future balance of power in a world where the difference between salvation and catastrophe often came down to the choices made by a single individual with the power to reshape everything. The smoke was visible from 3 miles away, a dark column rising from what had once been a small farming settlement on the border between fire and grass countries. Naruto might have ignored it entirely, just another casualty of the endless conflicts that plagued the region, except for what his enhanced senses detected beneath the acrid smell of burning wood and stone. Fear, desperation, and something else that made his chest tight with unwanted recognition. The particular terror that belonged to children who had lost everything and didn't understand why the world had suddenly become a place of violence and death. "You intend to investigate, don't you, Kit?" Kurama's voice carried a note of weary resignation. "Despite everything you've learned about the futility of playing hero to people who will never appreciate the sacrifice." "I'm curious," Naruto replied, though he wasn't entirely sure that was the whole truth. Curious about what could reduce an entire settlement to ash and leave survivors behind. Survivors who will undoubtedly prove to be complications rather than opportunities, but very well, your curiosity has served us well in the past. Perhaps this will provide another educational experience. The settlement had indeed been thoroughly destroyed. Buildings reduced to charred foundations, fields burned to sterile earth, even the well poisoned with something that made the water reek of chemical death. Professional work designed not just to eliminate the current population, but to ensure the land couldn't support life for years to come. And huddled in the ruins of what had been a grain storage building, Naruto found them, 7 children ranging in age from perhaps 6 to 12, dirty and hollow-eyed, and clinging to each other with the desperate intensity of people who had learned that the world offered no safety beyond what they could create for themselves. They scattered when he approached, like wild animals confronted by a predator. All except the oldest, a girl with tangled brown hair and eyes that held too much knowledge for someone who should still be playing with dolls. "Stay back," she warned, producing a kitchen knife that trembled in her small hands. "We don't have anything worth stealing, and we're not going anywhere with strangers." Intelligent child. She's learned to assume the worst of adults and prepare for violence as a first resort rather than a last one. Your village's approach to child rearing could learn from her pragmatism. "I'm not here to steal from you or take you anywhere," Naruto said, settling into a crouch that made him less threatening while keeping his hands visible. "I saw the smoke and wondered what happened here. Raiders," the girl said without lowering her weapon, "came 3 days ago demanding tribute for protection. When the village elders refused, they burned everything and killed everyone who tried to stop them. Everyone except you 7. We hid in the root cellar until they left. Then we came out too." She gestured helplessly at the devastation around them. To this. It was a story Naruto had heard variations of dozens of times during his months as a freelancer. Small communities caught between competing powers, destroyed by people who could take what they wanted by force and faced no consequences for their actions. The kind of routine atrocity that the great hidden villages ignored because it didn't threaten their strategic interests. The natural order asserting itself, Kit. The strong take what they need, the weak suffer the consequences, and those who survive adapt or perish. Your village would call this tragic. "I call it educational. Where will you go now?" Naruto asked. "Nowhere to go," another child spoke up, a boy of perhaps 10 with a bandaged arm and clothes that hung loose on his too-thin frame. "Next settlement is 40 miles, and they've got their own problems. Nobody wants extra mouths to feed, especially kids with no family to speak for them." The practical hopelessness of their situation was obvious. 7 children with no resources, no protection, and no skills beyond basic farming in a region where violence was commonplace, and charity was a luxury few could afford. They would be dead within a week, either from starvation, exposure, or the attention of predators who specialized in exploiting the vulnerable. Under normal circumstances, Naruto would have felt compelled to help, to escort them to safety, find them homes, ensure their survival through whatever means necessary. The impulse was still there, buried beneath months of harder lessons, but it was accompanied now by a colder assessment of what help actually meant. "You're thinking of interfering, aren't you? Of taking responsibility for their welfare despite having no obligation to do so and no reasonable expectation of gratitude for the effort." "I'm thinking they need to learn how to survive on their own," Naruto said quietly. "Because no one else is going to take care of them, and false hope is crueler than honest reality." Now that, Kit, sounds like wisdom. The question is whether you're prepared to teach them what they truly need to know rather than what you wish they could learn. "You want to survive?" Naruto asked the oldest girl. She nodded, still gripping her knife but no longer pointing it directly at him. "Then put away the kitchen knife. It's useless against anyone who actually wants to hurt you, and waving it around makes you look like prey trying to seem dangerous." His voice carried an authority that made her compliance automatic. Real survival starts with accurate threat assessment. Over the next hour, Naruto found himself doing something he'd never expected, teaching desperate children the harsh lessons he'd learned during his own transformation from village ninja to independent survivor. "Forget everything adults taught you about fairness and justice," he told them as they huddled around a small fire he'd helped them build in the ruins. "The world doesn't care about what you deserve or what's morally right. It cares about what you can take and what you can keep." "But that's wrong," the youngest protested, a girl who couldn't have been more than 7. "People are supposed to help each other. People are supposed to do a lot of things they don't actually do," Naruto replied with the kind of gentle cruelty that came from experience rather than malice. "People are supposed to protect children, supposed to care for the weak, supposed to share resources when they have abundance. How well did those supposed tos work out for your village?" Harsh truth delivered with surgical precision, Kit. "You're teaching them to see the world as it is rather than as they wish it were. This is genuine kindness disguised as callousness." The lessons continued as night fell: how to identify genuine threats versus mere intimidation. How to find shelter that provided concealment as well as protection from elements. How to scavenge for supplies without attracting attention from people who might take what you'd found. Most importantly, how to think like predators when necessary and prey when advantageous, switching between roles based on situation rather than moral preference. "The people who destroyed your village understood something your elders didn't," Naruto explained as he demonstrated techniques for purifying contaminated water. "They understood that power determines outcomes, not righteousness. They took what they wanted because they could, and they faced no consequences because no one was strong enough to impose any." "So we should become like them?" the oldest girl asked. "Hurt people weaker than us? You should become whatever you need to be to survive and protect what matters to you," Naruto corrected. "If that means being ruthless with threats, be ruthless. If it means being cooperative with potential allies, be cooperative. If it means killing people who try to harm you, kill them without hesitation or regret." The children absorbed these lessons with the grim attention of people who'd learned that ignorance was a luxury they could no longer afford. They asked practical questions about techniques and tactics, gradually abandoning moral objections in favor of operational effectiveness. By dawn, they were different children than they'd been 12 hours earlier. Harder, more realistic, less burdened by expectations that the world would treat them fairly if they followed rules that clearly didn't apply to everyone. "Where will you go now?" Naruto asked as he prepared to continue his own journey. "South," the oldest girl replied with new confidence in her voice. "There are ruins of an old fortress about 10 miles from here. Defensible position, fresh water source, close enough to trade roots for scavenging but far enough away to avoid casual notice. And if other people want to use those ruins, then we'll negotiate if they seem reasonable, or we'll make it too expensive for them to take what they want if they don't." Her hand rested on a proper combat knife Naruto had given her from his own supplies. "Like you taught us, excellent progress, Kit. In a single night, you've transformed helpless victims into potential survivors. They may not all live through the coming hardships, but those who do will be stronger for having learned reality rather than comfortable illusions." As Naruto walked away from the ruined settlement, he found himself thinking about the stark difference between the lessons he'd just taught and the ones he'd received during his own childhood. His instructors in Konoha had emphasized protection of the innocent, sacrifice for the greater good, and the importance of bonds between people who cared for each other. All admirable ideals that had ultimately proven inadequate when faced with a world that operated according to harsher principles. The children he'd just left behind would face terrible challenges in the days and months ahead. Some of them would probably die despite everything he'd taught them. But those who survived would do so because they understood how the world actually worked rather than how it was supposed to work. They would be strong because they'd been forced to become strong, not because someone had protected them from the necessity of strength. "You're becoming someone your village would no longer recognize, Kit." The boy who dreamed of becoming Hokage would have tried to save those children through kindness and protection. The person you're becoming saved them through education and harsh truth. "Is that wrong?" Naruto asked. "Wrong, right. These distinctions matter less than results. Those children now have skills and knowledge that might keep them alive. Your village's approach would have provided them with temporary safety followed by inevitable disaster when that safety was removed. But I used to be like them. Innocent, hopeful, believing that people were basically good and that trying hard enough could solve any problem. And look what that innocence cost you," years of rejection, exploitation, and being treated as a weapon rather than a person. Would you choose to return to that ignorance, even if it meant reclaiming the naive optimism that once defined you? The answer was immediate and certain. No, the person he'd been in Konoha had been weak in ways that went beyond physical capabilities. Weak in understanding, weak in judgment, weak in his willingness to accept harsh truths about how power and loyalty actually functioned in the world. The person he was becoming was stronger not just in terms of raw capabilities, but in his ability to operate effectively in a world that didn't reward moral purity or innocent hopes. Then embrace the transformation, Kit. Stop mourning the loss of illusions that were always obstacles to your growth. Become the teacher those children needed rather than the protector they expected. As the sun climbed higher, Naruto found himself considering Kisame's offer with new clarity. Akatsuki understood the world's harsh realities in ways that his village never had. They offered partnership to someone who'd evolved beyond the need for comfortable lies about justice and protection. They offered purpose that matched his developed capabilities rather than trying to limit him to roles that served others' comfort. For the first time since their conversation, the idea of joining Akatsuki felt not just logical but inevitable. He was no longer the boy who'd left Konoha hoping to find a place where being himself would be enough. He was becoming someone who understood that enough was defined by results rather than intentions, by effectiveness rather than righteousness. Someone who could teach desperate children how to survive in a world that wanted to destroy them. Someone who could impose order on chaos through superior power applied with surgical precision. Someone who might be exactly what an organization like Akatsuki needed to achieve goals that conventional methods had proven incapable of reaching. The student becomes the teacher, the protected becomes the protector, the naive dreamer becomes the pragmatic realist. Your transformation is nearly complete, Kit. Soon, you'll be ready to choose a purpose worthy of what you've become. That evening, as he made camp beside another stream in another anonymous forest, Naruto composed a message that would be delivered through the underground networks Kisame had mentioned. It was brief, direct, and carried implications that would reshape the balance of power across the entire ninja world. I'm interested in hearing more about your organization's specific goals and methods. When would be convenient for a more detailed discussion? As he sent the message on its way through channels that would eventually reach Akatsuki's leadership, Naruto felt something he hadn't experienced since leaving Konoha: anticipation for a future that might finally provide challenges worthy of his abilities and purposes worthy of his power. The boy who'd once dreamed of becoming Hokage was dead, replaced by someone who understood that real change required methods his village would never approve and goals they would never understand. It was time to discover what he might become when freed from their limitations entirely. Well done, Kit. You've chosen growth over comfort, reality over illusion, effectiveness over sentiment. Now let's see what interesting opportunities your choice creates. The emergency council meeting had been called for dawn, but by the time all the relevant parties assembled in the secure conference room beneath the Hokage Tower, the sun was already climbing toward its zenith. The delay wasn't due to logistics or scheduling conflicts. It was because no one wanted to be the first to voice what they all suspected about Naruto's transformation from missing person to potential threat. Tsunade sat at the head of the table, flanked by her advisors and the village's senior military commanders. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights spent reviewing intelligence reports that grew more disturbing with each update. Across from her, Jiraiya slumped in his chair with the defeated posture of a man watching his worst fears come to life in meticulous detail. "Status report," Tsunade said without preamble, her voice carrying the authority of command but also the strain of someone who'd been dreading this conversation for weeks. Kakashi stood, his usual casual demeanor replaced by the grim professionalism that emerged when the stakes became life or death. 3 months since initial departure from the village. Confirmed sightings across the northeastern border regions, operating as a freelance mercenary with dramatically enhanced capabilities. He activated a chakra-powered projection that displayed a map marked with red indicators. 14 separate incidents involving individuals matching Naruto's description. Escalating pattern of violence, increasing integration with Ninetales chakra, and complete abandonment of non-lethal approaches to problem resolution. Abandonment or evolution? Asked Danzo, his voice carrying the kind of cold pragmatism that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. From the reports, his effectiveness has increased dramatically since leaving village oversight. His effectiveness at killing has increased, Kakashi corrected sharply. along with his willingness to accept contracts that prioritize results over ethical considerations, which is exactly what we trained him to do, Danzo replied with insufferable logic. The difference is that now he's applying those skills in service of his own goals rather than the village's. The silence that followed was heavy with implications no one wanted to examine directly. Because the horrible truth was that Danzo was right, they had trained Naruto to be a weapon, to solve problems through superior force, to eliminate threats permanently when necessary. They'd simply expected him to remain pointed in directions they approved of. Intelligence suggests possible contact with Akatsuki operatives, Shikaku Nara reported, his tactical assessment delivered with the detached precision that made him invaluable in situations like this. Timing and locations correlate with known patterns of their recruitment activities. Jiraiya's head snapped up at that, his expression shifting from defeated resignation to genuine alarm. Contact or recruitment, unknown. But the behavioral changes documented in recent sightings suggest significant external influence on his psychological development. Or natural maturation accelerated by isolation and necessity, Tsunade said quietly, though her tone suggested she didn't believe her own optimistic interpretation. Hokage-sama, one of the Anbu commanders, spoke up. We need to address the classification issue. Is Uzumaki Naruto a missing village asset to be retrieved, or a rogue ninja to be eliminated? The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Because the answer would determine not just their operational approach, but how they understood their relationship with someone who'd been both their greatest weapon and their most tragic failure. He's our responsibility either way, Tsunade said finally, though the words felt inadequate even to her. The question is whether we're trying to save him or stop him. With respect, Hokage-sama, the Anbu commander continued, that distinction may be academic. If he's truly integrated with the Nine Tails to the extent suggested by witness accounts, retrieval may not be possible without eliminating the threat he represents to village security. He's not a threat, Kakashi said, with more conviction than the evidence supported. He's confused, isolated, and making poor decisions based on incomplete understanding of the consequences. He's killed 14 people in 3 months, Danzo observed, including a former 7 swordsman and multiple village-trained ninja. If that doesn't constitute a threat, what would? Those were defensive actions or contracted eliminations, Kakashi protested. There's no evidence he's actively targeting village interests or personnel. Yet, Jiraiya said quietly, and the single word carried enough weight to silence the entire room, because they all understood what he meant. The boy who'd once sworn to become Hokage, who defined himself through his desire to protect and belong and earn acceptance, was becoming someone who operated according to very different principles. Someone who might eventually view his former village as just another obstacle to overcome rather than a home to return to. What are you thinking, Jiraiya? Tsunade asked. The Toad Sage was quiet for a long moment, staring at the projected map as if it might reveal secrets beyond the simple plotting of locations and incidents. I'm thinking about a prophecy, he said finally. About a student who would either bring peace to the world or destroy it utterly. About choices that would determine the fate of everything we've built. And I'm terrified that we're watching the prophecy fulfill itself in exactly the way I hoped it never would. The implications of that statement sent a chill through everyone present. Jiraiya's prophecies had guided major strategic decisions for decades, their accuracy proven through events that had shaped the entire ninja world. If he believed Naruto was walking toward the destructive interpretation of his prophetic role. Recommendations? Tsunade asked, though she suspected she already knew what the tactical assessment would conclude. Immediate deployment of retrieval teams with authorization to use whatever force necessary to secure the target, Shikaku reported with mechanical precision. Primary objective: return Uzumaki Naruto to village custody for evaluation and possible rehabilitation. Secondary objective: prevent his recruitment by hostile organizations. Tertiary objective: he paused, clearly reluctant to voice the final contingency. Say it, Tsunade ordered. Tertiary objective: eliminate the threat if retrieval proves impossible, and his capabilities are assessed to exceed acceptable risk parameters. There it was, spoken aloud at last. The possibility that they might have to kill the boy they'd failed to save, destroy the weapon they'd failed to control, eliminate the person whose only crime had been wanting to belong somewhere he was valued. I'll lead the retrieval mission, Kakashi said immediately. If anyone can reach him, if there's any chance of bringing him home. You'll lead one team, Tsunade corrected. Jiraiya will lead another, approaching from a different vector. Multiple angles of approach, multiple opportunities for successful contact before. She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Before we have to treat him as an enemy rather than a lost student, Jiraiya completed grimly. Team composition? Kakashi asked, though his mind was already working through the tactical requirements and personal considerations involved. Your choice for personnel, but remember, this isn't a training exercise or a routine mission. If Naruto has truly integrated with the Nine Tails and is considering alliance with Akatsuki, the people you bring need to be prepared for combat against someone who might be beyond reasoning with. Kakashi nodded, understanding the subtext. This mission required ninja who could fight Naruto if necessary, who could survive an encounter with integrated Nine Tails power, and who could make the hard choice to eliminate him if retrieval proved impossible. It required people who could kill their former teammate to save their village. Timeline, he asked. Immediate departure. Every day we delay increases the likelihood that other factors will complicate the situation beyond our ability to manage. As the meeting broke up and various commanders departed to organize their respective elements of the operation, Tsunade remained seated at the table with Jiraiya, both of them staring at the tactical display that showed Naruto's probable current location. "Do you really think we can bring him back?" she asked quietly. "I think we have to try," Jiraiya replied, "because the alternative, accepting that we've lost him permanently, means acknowledging that everything we built this village to represent was ultimately inadequate when it mattered most. And if trying fails, if he's gone so far down this path that there's no way back." Jiraiya was quiet for a long time before answering. "Then we'll have to live with the consequences of our failures. And we'll have to make choices that will define what kind of people we really are when the comfortable illusions are stripped away." Through the conference room's small window, they could see Konoha going about its daily business, merchants setting up stalls, children playing in streets, ninja heading out on routine missions that didn't involve hunting down former comrades who'd become existential threats. Normal life continuing because the people living it didn't yet understand how fundamentally their world had changed, when one angry, isolated boy decided he'd had enough of being their unwilling weapon. "Hokage-sama," an aide appeared in the doorway, "there are reports of increased civilian unrest. Word is spreading about Naruto's absence, and people are asking questions about village security." Tsunade closed her eyes, feeling the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders like a burial shroud. Because managing the Naruto crisis was only the beginning, she also had to maintain village stability while their most powerful asset was potentially becoming their greatest enemy. "Schedule a public address for this evening," she ordered. "General reassurances about village security, routine personnel movements, nothing that suggests crisis or panic." After the aide left, she turned back to Jiraiya with an expression that mixed determination with barely concealed desperation. "Find him," she said quietly. "Whatever it takes, whoever you have to bring, whatever choices you have to make, find him before someone else does. Find him before he becomes something we can't save and can't afford to let live." Jiraiya nodded and stood to leave, but paused at the door. "Tsunade, if this goes wrong, if we're too late, or if he's changed too much to reach, the village will survive. It survived the Nine Tails attack, it survived the war, it'll survive whatever comes next. Will we?" "That," Jiraiya said quietly, "depends on what we're willing to do to people we once cared about in order to protect people we're responsible for." As he left to organize his own search team, Tsunade remained alone in the conference room, staring at tactical displays that reduced her greatest failure to red dots on a map and probability assessments that calculated the likelihood of having to execute someone she'd once considered family. Outside, Konoha continued its normal routines, unaware that their peace and security hung in the balance of a confrontation that would determine whether their former hero could be saved, or would have to be stopped permanently. The search for Naruto Uzumaki had officially begun, and everyone involved understood that it would likely end with either salvation or tragedy. They just weren't sure which outcome they should be hoping for anymore. In a small apartment across the village, Iruka Yumino sat grading academy papers and trying not to think about the empty desk in his classroom that had once belonged to a blonde boy who dreamed of becoming Hokage. The official story was routine reassignment to advanced training outside the village, but teachers heard things, noticed patterns, understood when explanations didn't match observable reality. Naruto was gone, possibly forever. And based on the increased security measures and hushed conversations among senior staff, His absence was being treated as a crisis rather than a routine deployment. Iruka set down his grading pen and picked up a photograph from his desk. Team 7 after their first successful mission, 3 young faces full of hope and determination, and the kind of innocent optimism that the world seemed designed to crush. One face belonged to a boy who'd abandoned everything for power. One face belonged to a girl who now spent 18 hours a day in the hospital, avoiding human connection. One face belonged to a boy who'd walked away from the village that had never learned to see him as anything more than a useful tool. Team 7 was gone, destroyed as thoroughly as if they'd all died in battle. But unlike death, this destruction carried the weight of choices that might have been made differently, support that might have been offered, acceptance that might have been given freely rather than withheld until it was too late. As night fell over Konoha, Iruka found himself wondering if the boy he'd once tried to mentor was still alive somewhere, still capable of redemption, still worth the risk that salvation would require. Or if the person Naruto was becoming had already moved beyond the reach of anyone who remembered the lonely child who'd once sat in his classroom, desperately seeking the recognition that everyone seemed determined to deny him. The answer, when it came, would determine not just Naruto's fate, but the future of everyone who'd failed him when failure meant the difference between salvation and damnation. And in the darkness beyond Konoha's walls, forces were moving that would ensure that answer came sooner rather than later, with consequences that would reshape the ninja world in ways no one was prepared to handle. The hunt had begun, but the prey had already chosen sides in a conflict that would define the meaning of power, loyalty, and the price of belonging in a world where strength determined everything. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you want the next part of this video, subscribe and comment down below and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. Stay tuned for more exciting what if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious.